Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Redistricting Technology, What to Think About as the Next Cycle Approaches. I'm Wendy Underhill, Director for Elections and Redistricting with the National Conference of State Legislatures. We have a few housekeeping matters to begin with. This is a 60-minute webinar, and it is being recorded, and it will be made available online at NCSL's website in just a few days. We will have a PDF of these slides and additional resources already up in the tab labeled Resources. So you can find them right above the presentation itself right now and download if you'd like to as handouts. And the speakers' bios, of course, are in the tab labeled Speakers. During the presentation, please ask questions by typing them in the chat box on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. On my screen, it looks green. I'm not sure if that's how it's going to look for you. I would like to know who's on the line today, so if you'd like to type in your name and state or anything else you'd like to share, please do that now. As for questions, we will hold those and answer them at the end. If you're having technical difficulties, please send us a message in the chat box. Our operator will reply to you privately and help resolve that issue. All right, next slide. First, a little about NCSL. Since 1975, NCSL has been the champion of state legislatures. We serve all 7,383 legislators and 30,000 legislative staff by providing nonpartisan research and analysis. NCSL speaks on behalf of legislatures in D.C. and links legislators with each other and with experts such as those we are pleased to be featuring today. In terms of redistricting, NCSL provides a place for education and research where Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated people can all come together. We have planned a series of seminars on redistricting with the next one scheduled next month in Columbus, Ohio. And also, if you are a legislator or a legislative staff person, we are happy to handle research requests or provide customized assistance, and that could include testimony or in-state workshops. The best thing to do is give us a call, and we'll see what your needs are and how we can help. Now, for our speakers. As I mentioned, their bios are in the resource box, but in short, Ben Collins is a Mississippi native with an MS in counseling psychology and an educational specialization in GIS. Ben has worked for the Mississippi legislature for 12 years. Prior to this, Ben was a GIS researcher and demographer for the Stennis Institute of Government, working on redistricting at the county and municipal levels. Karen McDonald is the director of the statewide database, which is the redistricting database for the state of California, and also the Election Administration Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley. She studies, teaches, and writes on redistricting, voting rights, and election administration issues. Karen serves as the State of California's liaison to the Census Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office. Now, I've had a chance to preview Ben and Karen's slides, and I'm personally pretty excited to learn all that I can from them today. And with that, it's yours, Ben and Karen.
Good afternoon or morning, everyone, as the case may be. This is Ben Collins, and as mentioned, I am the Mississippi Director of GIS for the Mississippi Legislature. Today we're going to talk about redistricting and try to present some ideas and thoughts that will guide you and maybe provide some insight and inspiration as you move forward building your redistricting operation. When we speak about redistricting technology, it's good to get everybody on the same page about what we're actually talking about. There's a lot of moving parts to redistricting. In our office, we group it into two broad categories, the legal side and the technical side. And they're pretty self-explanatory. The legal side is the work of attorneys, and they guide and make decisions about the structure of how things should move forward, and they're responsible for producing the quality end product. As the slide suggests, creating a sound legal process that meets the prescribed expectations for production and access enables the creation of a much stronger end product, and stronger end product both for the constituent and for the legislature. Anything that's not legal work is technical work. Just ask the attorneys in question. The technical work involves building and maintaining the systems and structures that allow us to do redistricting work. And this is data identification, acquisition, quality assurance, hardware purchasing, anything that falls outside the realm of the legal arena in this work. Now, there can be and there should be a great deal of overlap between the two categories. It's important for the attorneys involved to understand
We're having a little technical difficulty. I don't hear Ben's voice. We're working on this, so hang tight, everybody.
Okay, this is Karin, the California person. I am going to just go to the next slide and start taking it from there, and then we can go back to Ben's slide if that's okay with everybody, and he can cover what he did not have an opportunity to cover just now. So good morning, everybody. Good morning from California, wherever you are. It's a lot later. California is a commission state, so you are hearing from the other end of the spectrum when you're talking to me. Our processes are directed by our commission, and we are probably a little bit different than you all are. So let's talk about what the legal requirements are. The legal requirements really broadly fall into some of the obvious categories. The first one, of course, is always what are your criteria. And we're talking about legal requirements as far as they are going to be referring to software, or they're going to be necessary for you to think about software. You need to know who is responsible for the line drawing. That's also going to affect the way you're going to be thinking about software. When do you have to start and when do you have to be done? That's really important to know because you have to look at your data. Where are you going to be drawing lines? Are you going to be drawing lines in one place, or are you going to be moving about? And, you know, who is drawing the lines, of course? Is it the commission? Is it the legislature? Is it legislative staff, or who is it? This where tab is really about whether you're going to have to go to hearings to different places, or to, collect input from your residents, perhaps. And what does that mean for your software and your technology? Does that mean your entire software and technology shop moves with you, or does that mean they stay put? It's definitely something to think about. And then there's the how. Is this a traditional process, which means that it doesn't necessarily talk about explicit transparency requirements, or is it an explicitly transparent process, which is what we have in California? And that is also something that you want to consider when you're looking at your entire technical operation. And then finally, what data are you using, and where and when do you get it? And again, this is something that will affect everything that you're going to be doing. I just saw that Ben got back here, and I think that perhaps, Ben, do you want to take over and just finish your first slide, or?
I think that I had probably said all I needed to say, and we're having a discussion about redistricting technology, and my phone gets disconnected. So there's a lesson in that as well. No, continue, Karen. I'll pick back up. So.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Ben. So let's go to the next slide, and that is data. That's usually where I start personally. So first you figure out what your criteria are, obviously, and then you figure out what data do you need. So what data are in your redistricting database? What is in your redistricting database? So you work backwards and you consider what your needs are. Do you need political data? Political data includes voter registration and statement of vote. Do you need those? And then for how many elections would you need those? If you're doing any kind of racially polarized voting analysis, and you, of course, need to consider that, even though it may not explicitly say in your criteria that that's what you need, but that is, where you talk to your lawyers, and they'll tell you, probably we're going to need these data, and then, make a note of that because you're going to probably have to collect it. Next point, will you need to adjust your census data for prison populations? This is something we're dealing with in California right now. There are some other states that have dealt with it in the last round of redistricting. There are others that are going to be doing it for the first time now. The big thing to do about that at this point, it's September 2019. Start talking to your correction folks immediately. The census is not going to adjust it for you. The census will be giving you some tools that can help you with geocoding, but they're not going to adjust your prison populations for you. So you're going to have to talk to your corrections people and see what kinds of files they have, because that is essentially what you need to incorporate into your redistricting database. Are there any other data types that you need to use? For example, do you need something from the American Community Survey? Remember that what you're getting from James Whitehorn's office is the PL 94-171 data file, as we Redistricting Geeks refer to it. It's the short form data. It's the data that are going to be collected on Census Day, April 1, in the year ending with 0. And the long form is not around anymore. We now have the American Community Survey. There is one variable that I know most people will need from the American Community Survey, and that is citizen voting age population, because that is what you're going to be using to figure out whether you can draw a Section 2 district, Federal Voting Rights Act Section 2 district. So are there other data types that you need to use? For example, are there locally sourced data? Is there anything in your guidelines that says you have to talk to people about where their neighborhoods are? What about communities of interest? Those are not going to be data that you get from the census. So you need to start considering what you need. What is your timeline to collect or receive these data? So think about how and when you implement these adjustments. For example, if you are getting your prison data from your nice friends at the Department of Corrections in your state, when do you get those? Are they going to be current? Are they going to be current? Are they going to give you a data set that was run on Census Day so that you can, so that you're not basically adjusting one data set that was collected on April 1, 2020 with a data set that was run today, because those numbers change, right? So you don't want to go to apples and oranges. When are you going to get this data set? How are you going to receive it? Do you have the security infrastructure to receive those data? Because it's possible that those data are very sensitive and you may not be able to just put them on somebody's laptop. How are you going to implement these adjustments? Do you have a plan on how to do that? And what does this mean for data availability? Are your data actually going to be available for line drawing immediately as soon as James Whitehorn sends you the PL94? Or are you going to take another couple of weeks or maybe 4 weeks or so to build in all of these other data sets? Who builds your database? Are you going to do it, or do you have a vendor do it? If you have a vendor do it, you should probably start looking for one. And then finally, who has access to it? And that is something that we'll talk about a little bit later in a later slide. Very quickly to go through geography, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the data because you will obviously build this data set on geography because geography is essentially what draws a district. What geography do you need to draw lines? Again, back to your criteria, what do you need? Are you just going to use census geography? Census geography, just to remind everybody, consists mainly of blocks and block groups and tracts. On the lower level, from the census, you can also get your city and county boundaries. Is that geography sufficient? Or is there something else that you need? If you just use census geography, how many census blocks do you have in your state? And I'm not asking this as a trick question. For California, we have 720,000 census blocks. What that means for us in terms of redistricting technology is that every time we move something around, 720,000 census blocks are moving around. So it means that the software has to be able to handle that amount of geography with associated data. So that is a pretty big deal. For most states, of course, it's going to be significantly less. But it's good to know what that number is and then make sure that you keep that in mind when you're thinking about technology. Do you need geography to supplement what you get from the census? Do you need precincts? Is there anything in your regs or in your constitution that says you have to draw with precincts? And if so, where do you get it and when do you get it? I know some people have participated in the VTD program. That means that the Census Bureau is going to give you some data on your precinct level. You're really lucky if your precincts are still the same. For California, they change every 2.5 minutes. In fact, a whole set of precincts has just changed since I started to talk. And so for us, this is not an option. So make sure you know what you're getting from census, when you get it, where you get it, and then how does that get incorporated into your technology? If you can't use the VTDs from the census, what do you need to do to get it in there? And then the other question is, do you need to incorporate things into your database? Like, for example, if you have communities of interest that you're collecting later, do they need to be in your database? Do they need to be in your redistricting database, or could they be separate? And what about neighborhoods? It's the same question. I think, Ben, this is your slide, the software slide.
All right, thank you, Karen, and thank you for everybody for bearing with me earlier when my landline dropped. Software is generally, somebody mentions redistricting technology, the first thing that pops in your head is, oh, what software you're using. Again, it's much larger than that. And the vendor behind the software that you use will make a vast difference in your redistricting experience, especially during crunch times. You're not just buying the software that's on your desktop, you're buying the service behind it as well. And it pays to do a little bit of shopping about that as you move forward. In this office, we try to keep our tools simple. We use a tool that's specifically tailored to the work we do in this office. That prevents us from having unrequired features, buying or paying maintenance on modules that we perhaps don't use, or having data on the system that is not used for the redistricting process. Any data on your redistricting system can be somewhat assumed to have involvement in the redistricting process. So if you have non-point source pollution layers on your redistricting computer, someone's going to want to know why. Don't use bazookas to kill gnats. Just because we have the capability of doing something may fall outside the scope of the redistricting process. Excuse me. And so you have to work with your legal team to make sure that what you're using is appropriate for the work you're trying to do. Only have structures, software, and data on the system that is required for the task, and work closely with your legal staff to determine what data elements are being kept, and even what the graphical user interface will present to stakeholders as they utilize or view the software. People can get very upset if they feel like their information has been not presented or obscured some way. So you try to be consistent across all stakeholders. And as you work, you also have to understand the capabilities of your software in terms of your production level management aspects. Your member of your community, your constituency that comes in and draws the district around their house is not going to be too concerned with the compactness score, but you're going to need to have the capabilities to run those for the legal team and other requesters. The other aspects of production level management include large-scale production runs, 300 or 400, different maps, multiple data points and elements that have to be integrated, cartographic elements. Make sure that the software you choose fits your needs in those areas as well. And this last note on this slide is just a personal approach that's borrowed from all schools of information technology, and that's develop a common structure and naming conventions for your files. The reality of the situation is that some of us can walk in one day and may not have an office to walk into, or something may happen, God forbid, to one of us on the way to the office. If you've ever had to rescue project work off of a coworker's computer after they are no longer your coworker, you know this can be an egg hunt in a haystack with no needles. So develop a common structure that everyone understands, and it helps with that system redundancy I mentioned earlier. I also want to say a brief note about hardware. It's not on the slide. Is that you really need to keep your hardware elements current and per community expectations. Most of your stakeholders are going to have a flat screen TV in their home at this point. And if they come into your redistricting office and they're having to look over your shoulder at a cathode ray tube monitor on a system that's running from 1994, their faith in the redistricting process may not be as robust as it once was. Also, if you're presenting to stakeholders, bear in mind that this is a click and point gratification culture, so you need to tailor your information and your maps and other products toward that perspective in decision making. I think that brings me to what I want to say about software. Karen?
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide is titled Who is Out There? So there are obviously quite a few vendors out there. Please consider that different vendors offer different solutions or may offer different solutions, and You'll have to just figure out what you want from a vendor. For example, you could get a vendor who will give you software. You could get a vendor who will give you software and data. You can get a vendor who will give you software plus data plus line drawing services, or a vendor who will do another combination of those aspects. You know that you need all of these things. You're going to need software, you're going to need data, you're going to need line drawing. Maybe some of this is in-house, maybe some of this is a different vendor. So there may be some sort of a combo out there. So you don't necessarily need to go to the same person. Is it easier for you to deal with one person? Is it easier to deal with various people? Do you have people that you're already dealing with? So this is all something that you need to consider. Established vendors with known solutions versus new vendors with new approaches to technology. Also something to think about. There are, of course, vendors that we have all worked with for a really long time, but as time goes on and there are now more people that are interested in mapping. Obviously, everybody has maps on their smartphones now. You know, we're all using Google Earth. We're using various mapping interfaces to figure out how to get to the store or how to get home quicker and so forth. And there is a whole community of people that has gotten more skilled in mapping, and there's more programmers out there. So obviously there are now people that are trying to break into this particular field. Established vendors, of course, you know what you're getting. They have solutions that you know how they work. And there are also new vendors out there that may think about redistricting technology out of the box, and that may be something to consider. In particular, since with most of the established vendors, I think perhaps with all of them, you're dealing with proprietary software, and most of the new ones, as far as I can tell, they're all working with open source software. So this will probably partially depend on your state. There are some states that are more interested in using open source software, and you can kind of see which way the wind is blowing in those states, and that also means that you perhaps need to keep an eye open. The question is also, do you need an in-house system? Do you perhaps have an in-house system? Do you want to modify an in-house system? Or do you want to go with an off-the-shelf solution? And that'll depend on what your redistricting shop looks like. It depends on really on a host of different issues. But it's something to ask yourself. And then perhaps there's a hybrid option. Perhaps you have an in-house system for something and you have an off-the-shelf solution for something else. Perhaps you have technology that your ledge staff is using, but then you want to go to a vendor and get some sort of an online redistricting tool. So it is very possible that there may be some mixture of the two. With that, back to Ben.
Thank you again, Karen. The next slide, and this slide builds on, as it should, the ones that have come before it. I want to speak a minute about the process components of the redistricting activities. Break it down as you're able to in the most discrete steps possible. And then decide how you are going to leverage your technology assets to meet those needs. Every one of us does this work a little bit different. And speaking with all of us, I've determined that we all have our own unique nuances to how we conduct this work in our given area. But some of the examples of process tasks in this office are building report and map templates. Have these already vetted and in place so that all you have to do is load content onto them. Database architecture and design. This goes without saying. We have to do a lot of back-end design work to make sure that the dashboard of the GIS operates the way it should. Systems use logs. Some jurisdictions use the software to keep up with who's using the software and the products that those work sessions produce. And next step is data and product protection, which we're going to talk about security in later slides, but that's something that you need to give a lot of thought to in your process. How do you keep it secure as you move forward? And then the publication aspects of what we do. I can't stress enough that we can generate a lot of paper. We can build many, many maps. And your system your process has to be able to accommodate both that production aspect as well as continuing the ongoing work you're doing when you're drawing districts. The process components for your area may be different, and don't feel like one piece of software fits all. As Karen says, sometimes you have to take something off the shelf that will build a better graphical product for your needs or allow you to analyze or look at the data in some way that's unique to your situation. I think that the next slide goes to access, and I think that, Karen, you're taking this one?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. So this access slide, of course, refers to access to software. And again, piggybacking on to something that Ben has just outlined, you really have to figure out who needs access and what type of access they need. Are you going to be supplying your line drawers with software? And if you, let's just say you hire consultants to draw your lines, are they going to bring their own software? If you hire consultants, will your staff also need software? And if so, should that be the same software? Or do you need then to look into how files are going to be shared, for example? Is each of your legislators going to request a copy? How about each of your commissioners? I'll tell you from having gone through California's redistricting process with the commission, if you say software, everybody's going to raise their hand and say, I want a copy. And I am guessing that that is the same for most legislatures. But if you're a copy of software, if you have like desktop software, so basically one copy for one desktop, and you have, I don't know how many people that are raising their hand there, all of a sudden your price tag is really going to go skyrocketing if each copy is going to cost whatever, $5,000 or $10,000. So all of a sudden you could be looking at some pretty significant costs. So the question is also, will there be access to software by the public? There's more and more of a push, which I'm sure all of you have seen, by the public to be able to participate in some fashion in the redistricting process. And I think a lot of that really also has to do with the fact that people are just becoming more familiar with maps and with mapping software, again, because everybody's using it to some extent. But if there's access to software by the public, what does that look like? Are you going to have an online redistricting tool for public access? And if so, could that then, going back to everybody raising their hand and wanting a software copy, could that eliminate the need for desktop copies, for example, for some of the legislators or commissioners or staff? You'd have to look at that very closely, like what can your software do? The next slide goes into this in a little bit more depth, online versus desktop access. Again, look at whether you need an online redistricting tool, and then look at whether it works with your geography and your requirements. And to that, I would say, test it. Pretty much everybody is going to tell you that it works. And personally, I come from the school of don't just tell me, show me. So I want to see that it actually works. Load those 720,000 census blocks in there, and if I don't fall asleep while the first district is building itself, then we may be able to talk. Does it have the same capabilities of your desktop versions? So if you have an online redistricting tool, do you have the same functionality on that? Do you actually need the same functionality? If you're just giving it, or I don't want to say just, if you're giving it to the public is probably not, generally speaking, going to be as skilled in drawing lines or as educated on drawing lines. Do you want to throw every single feature that is in your desktop software at a public redistricting tool? Is that going to confuse people? You have to think about where it's hosted and who is responsible for hosting and how many simultaneous users it can handle, and then where the data are stored. So questions, there's lots of questions about this, but all things that you absolutely need to consider. And when you're buying a desktop version, you should be asking the vendors to tell you this. Like Wendy said at some point, it's almost like buying a car. You need to figure out how to compare the car types, and then figure out, what the various costs are. And irrespective of your online tool versus desktop tools, how are the people that are working on these tools connected? How are they going to share data? I just got a note here that my volume is low. I'm not sure what to do about that. Perhaps, can you guys still hear me?
It's okay now. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just got a little distracted here. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, technology that you control and technology that you do not control. Look at where your submissions are coming from. You have to consider that when you're accepting submissions or any kind of input, and of course nobody can refuse input, where are they coming from? Are they coming from technology that you supply? So is it a tool that you're providing, or is it technology that somebody else supplies? Again, back to my comments earlier about many players being out there, and some of them may strive to actually have a tool that that somebody who is a professional redistricting person can use, but others may have some sort of reduced capability, and they just want to put something out there that the public can use. We had an advocacy group, for example, in California in 2011 that had a tool out there that some people were using. There were also some academics out there that had some tools out there, and then open source providers. But the problem that comes in there is, what are those data that these technologies are using? So you may want to think about whether you want to get ahead of this issue of perhaps getting a submission that says, here is a perfect district. It meets all your criteria. I want you to take it into consideration. And then you're looking at it, and you're looking at it with your official database, and you're realizing that it's not equally populated. You have no idea how the person that submitted it put it together and why they think that this is a perfect district. So, there may be other players out there, and there may be things coming your way that you then have to deal with and that you have to explain. And you may think about whether you want to get a step ahead of this and whether you want to talk to the public and just let them know what's going on out there. And then finally, most importantly, and this is something that we've done in California for a long time, is we only have one data set, and that's the statewide database, MyShop. We have one redistricting data set that everybody uses, so that people can take all the time in the world to argue about the lines, and they don't have to argue about the data. And that's really what probably redistricting should be. Argue about the lines, and, let's everybody just agree on the data. The next slide is about submissions, and I've talked about this a little bit already. So will you accept public input? And if so, in which forms? Is it going to be written, maps, files? Ben has said previously that he has gotten maps that were drawn on napkins, I think, and those are always the ones that you want to keep and then hang on your wall later, because people don't tend to believe that you really did get a map on a napkin, but, they always come in. And are you going to specify the parameters of your public submissions? Are you going to be accepting absolutely anything that comes in? That means also a phone call that says, okay, this is what this should look like. Or are you going to accept everything in whatever format it comes in, partial maps, or only complete statewide maps, or just communities of interest? It's probably good to just specify that in advance, because that way you can be prepared for whatever comes in the door. And then again, something that I just spoke about on the last slide, how do you deal with submissions that were drawn with data that are different from your own and the potentially non-conforming districts? What are you going to do about that? Are you going to put some warnings on your website? I don't think that we can control what's out there. I mean, I know we can't control what's out there. So it's a good thing to just keep your ear on the ground and periodically check who is organizing in your state, who is out there, what kind of other software is out there, and whether that is software that people are actually going to be using, and then what does it look like if you're going to get a submission from those people. And with that, I will send it back to Ben. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Karen. The next topic that we move to is security. And I cannot stress enough, and this gets stressed in every environment, that the security of your digital resources should be priority. Consider them under constant attack, particularly if your redistricting system is connected to the internet in any way. Understand your vulnerabilities and where you need to put some protections in place. As far as the technology and the information you use, how are you going to conduct quality assurance reviews of any data that you import? And the technology can definitely help with this. But it can also cause problems. Transferring data between platforms can always create subtle, if unnoticeable, changes in data. Fields get dropped, substitutions get made. So you must always do some type of quality assessment on the data that you put into your redistricting system. And then the next hard question you have to ask about security is access, and we've touched on this already. But who sees what in your system, and why? You must understand why they are allowed to see what's on your system when others aren't. Have those justifications and rationalizations in place prior to starting, so that there's no confusion among stakeholders about information and the process. Think about how long you are going to store the data and products that you're using, both in the short and long term. If you create an elections performance database for your system, is that available publicly? Do you need to publish that information on a GIS or data clearinghouse? In the long term, how are you going to tend to the data that you're generating? We're not only doing this work for the task that's immediately in front of us, but as we look back and those that come after us look back, they're going to want to know how we did it and why. So what's your ideas for long-term data storage in your office or your agency? And when you think about storage, you have to think about it in terms of external or internal storage. External storage is becoming very popular. Cloud-based processing and storage is just a click away. But if you use an external storage location or storage service, read the fine print. Understand who owns that data, who has access to it, and what types of utilization they will do internally on your data. All these things need to be clear, and your legal team needs to be up to date on what exactly is going on if you use an external data source or data storage area. Internally, you just need to make sure you have the hardware and the capability to keep stuff for the foreseeable future. We constantly seem to get questions about what it used to look like or what was it before we affected a change upon it. So have those informations handy and ready, and where you can get your hands on them pretty quick, because those requests do come in. And lastly on this slide is a note about physical security, and this doesn't pertain to technology per se, but is under the technical umbrella. Physical security does not have to be sophisticated. Somebody can hang around your door or go through your garbage can. So do practice good document security in all of your redistricting activities. Don't assume that somebody isn't out to be a problem actor in the problem or in the work. Karen, you had some comments you want to make about security?
Yeah, just to piggyback on, thank you very much, Ben, to some of the issues you've raised. In terms of security requirements, I have seen this raised at NCSL. The question is, the software that you're considering, does it need to be certified for federal security standards? That is definitely something you want to take a look at. And if so, is your vendor going to be responsible for that certification and for the cost, or are you going to be? But again, you can usually, this goes back to something that Ben said at the very beginning, you have to look at what you really need. Don't get more than what you need. If you don't need a federal security certification, then don't worry about it. Also, will there be backups? Backups are a really big deal around here, and I think they need to be for everybody. I mean, there's hackers out there. Last redistricting round, California had a denial of service attack. It was not fun, and it was not pretty, and we managed to get through it. But, if you're the one that has the data set and you're responsible for giving it to everybody, then you better have some plans in place for, a mirror, a backup, and things like that. And if you have a vendor who's doing your database and, the more vendor contracts you have going, you need to still make sure that you know who's responsible for all of that stuff. And then finally, back to what Ben just said, which is your terminals and just kind of the lower end, the lower hanging fruit of all this stuff. Your software and your machines need to be patched. Somebody may be able to stick a thumb drive into your machine, but if your machines are not patched, then they don't even have to come over with a thumb drive. They can just hack into your machine really quickly. So that's definitely also something to keep an eye on. And then finally, cost. And to that, I think we would summarize saying take all of the info that you've gathered based on the answers to the many, many questions that we have just raised, and then start putting together an RFP if that's the way that you're going to go, if you want to go with a vendor. Make sure you know the per terminal costs and make sure you know what's exactly included. Are you going to get updates? What are you getting with your per terminal cost for your software? Are they going to be ongoing costs? Are they going to be maintenance fees? Are you going to be locked in a contract for many, many years after you don't use your software anymore? What happens? And then understand hosting. Who does this? The vendor or you? If you host things in-house, then figure out what the cost is. Factor in that you're now responsible for your own security. If the vendor hosts something, you still have to make sure that their security meets your needs. And again, Ben talked about this. Remember, there are costs associated with all of this stuff. So just because you're not giving that money to a vendor doesn't mean that there are not costs. If the vendor hosts your online system, for how long are they going to do that? Where are they going to host that? This morning, there was a really big deal on National Public Radio about various, companies that people don't like being hosted on Amazon and whatnot. Amazon may work for you. We use Amazon, but does that work for you? For how long does the online system need to be hosted? How long do you need to keep it live if you have one? Where? What happens afterwards? And then, again, who is responsible for security and access for online systems? That definitely will be a long conversation in your office. Are people going to get accounts? Who makes sure that there isn't just random stuff coming in that you don't know what to do with? And with that, back to Ben.
Well, we covered a volume of subjects lightly moving forward, and I'll go ahead and speak for Karen in this regard. If anyone has any questions, we are following the audience chat, and of course you can contact us after the webinar if the curiosity continues. I'd like to touch briefly on beyond redistricting, which is the next slide. What's next? At some point, believe it or not, we will all survive this, and it will be done. It will be behind us. We will have done it. From that point, it falls back to the legal realm and the challenges and approaches that are taken on the product you generate. But eventually, you will have a map. What then? When you're buying and procuring and building technology systems, you want to look at what are you going to do with these resources once redistricting is done. Here in this office, I operate under the umbrella of the peer committee, which is our version of the general accounting office. So when redistricting is not on fire, I work as an analyst and investigator for that particular agency. So that's a good way to cover the resources and put them to use when redistricting is not going on. Some questions to ask yourself about what happens after the deed is done is what will be the use of the hardware components? It does no good to stick computers back in a back office and just let them languish for a decade until you try to pull them out and realize that they're no longer of relevance, that they're obsolete. What type of records do you need to be kept in the long term, and how and where will they be stored? I already touched on this during the access and some of the other slides. Your long-term records are a vital part of your office's archival responsibility, so you do want to have plans in place for those. How does your office provide GIS services for other legislative functions? Are you contacted by legislators who are looking for a particular map of the road infrastructure in their district, or a particular legislator who's looking at an economic development project and needs to find a certain placement area for a factory or manufacturing or service industry in his area? If you provide these services, then you're going to be able to utilize the GIS software and the hardware to provide informed decision-making to your legislatures. It's a very powerful tool, very powerful tool. And then, does your office have plans or responsibilities for long-term production capability? When someone needs a map from your office and they need that map in print media, where do they go? Do they come to you? Or how many of these requests do you get over the course of a year? And do you have the sustainable infrastructure to meet these needs and requests? Think about what comes next, because eventually we will get through this and we will have a map and a product. I'm going to move on to my next slide, which is the current events slide. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the ways that redistricting technology is on the front page of our news servers when we open them up every morning. All manner of developments move, and they can move quickly or slowly. It doesn't take much searching to figure out that there is a number of data issues related to a lot of these issues that are on the front page. And some things that I try to do is think about how would that scenario play out if it happened to this office. If perhaps a family member of mine got a hold of my archive of work and gave that out freely, or papers or documents were kept outside of confidential areas, how would this office react? And some of the things to think about is, how do you control data once it leaves your system? And that's your redistricting system, your redistricting process. And understand with your legal team how far legislative privilege extends. What does that mean for the operation of your staff and your data in your office? The second item I would underscore is, what is the legal standing of confidential institution records being stored on a private individual's computer? Sometimes we get in a hurry and it's easier just to send it through some non-work email server or off your phone. What was the legal standing of the information that may be on those private systems, those private pieces of technology? Understand that and discuss that with your legal team and put those metrics in place or measures in place to manage that control of information and data. And then lastly, I've talked on this already, how will your work papers, draft models, and documents that record the deliberative process that we go through be handled once the deed is done? And that, unless Karen has something else to add about current events, I believe that brings us to the end of our slide presentation. And
yeah, I think this goes back to Wendy now.
Great.
Okay.
Ben and Karin, this is where you can pretend that you're hearing all of us applaud for you. So this is the virtual applause right at this moment. And I definitely do want to thank you both for your time and for this great information you've shared. We do have two more slides I want to talk about real briefly. While I'm talking about them, you can be putting additional questions into the chat box if you like. This first is a list of vendors that NCSL is aware of in the redistricting software universe. There may be others out there as well. We do have a web page on this if you want to look for those after the fact or come back to this slide. And then the next slide is about our upcoming redistricting seminars. I know that Karin will be there to help us walk through some of the data and technology aspects that we've heard in real brief form today, and we'll do it in more depth there. So if you can join us in Columbus, please do, or the next 3 meetings after that, Las Vegas, Portland, and D.C., and perhaps you'll even want to come to more than one of those events. Okay, I think we're ready for the questions now. I've got a lot of these captured and more still coming, it looks like. Could one of you just real quickly talk about the legal basis for adjusting prison populations? And if you don't want to, I do have a list of those available for us as well, which states have it and which states don't.
Yeah, hi, this is Karin, and I think this is probably state-specific, so you need to pull your legislation and take a look at what it says. I know for California it took quite a few eyes on the legislation to figure out what they wanted us to do, and then we ended up having to go back to the legislature to do a technical cleanup bill to make it implementable. So I would say pull your legislation, read it really carefully, make sure that you can get the data that they're telling you to use, and then if you can't implement it the way it's written, then you need to move very quickly to get a cleanup bill. If anybody wants to talk about what we're doing in California and how we did it, I am very happy to talk to anybody. It's taken up a lot of time to figure out how to do this.
Got it. And I'll just add there that there are 6 states that are planning on doing this reallocation of prisoners from the prison address back to their home address when possible in the 2020 cycle. 2 states did it in the last cycle. Okay, the next question is, what approaches are used to check for fairness? Now, we all know that fairness is in the eye of the beholder, but they gave some examples: racial balance and partisan neutrality. Do most software tools include something to check for this? Can either of you address that question?
I can speak to the package that I have without,
Great.
Specifically advertising for one or the other. But I'm just looking at the list of reports that are internal to that particular software, and there is an efficiency gap report. There are political asymmetry reports. The reports that the software that are built into the software is definitely something that the buyer needs to review and make sure meets their specific needs for their specific jurisdiction. So in general, the answer is yes, some of them are there, but maybe not the ones that are specifically used in your area. But again, a responsive vendor will be able to help you, if not develop those tools for you, locate something that'll work for you. So.
Yeah, and to add on to that, if you're talking about racial fairness, I'm not sure if you're talking about the implementation of the Federal Voting Rights Act, because I think that's what quite a few people would assume that you're talking about. That's something you need to talk to your attorneys about, and you're going to need a statistician and so forth. To my knowledge, there is not a software product out there that will do a racially polarized voting analysis and then draw you a nice district that'll stand up in a court. That it doesn't work that way. But certainly, a GIS tool will let you do some assessments. I think every redistricting tool has a lot of reports in there, and some of them will be useful to your state, and some of them will not be.
Got it. And I think a follow-on to that question is about whether packages include the newer models that check for statistical outliers. And I think there we're talking about the kind of sampling that we might be seeing out of mathematicians' offices. I'm guessing that, well, let me ask the two of you, are you familiar with packages that include that kind of analysis?
I know that I've talked to a couple of vendors that would that are putting or have put new statistical measures in. I think that at this point, one really would need to monitor what's happening with the court decisions and also what's going on in the statistical world on some level, because some of the measures that were very popular a couple of years ago are kind of falling into the not so popular anymore category now. These things are really changing. For California, I can tell you that the compactness measures, for example, that are usually used in other states don't apply to California just because of the way that our compactness is assessed. So it's something where you have to really, again, go back to your criteria and figure out what you need. Really figure out what you need. And just because it's the hot new measure out there and you have this really great academic who's telling you all about it doesn't mean you need it.
Got it. Okay, thank you on that. Can either of you address the cost of doing redistricting? It's
not cheap. I would say it depends on, again, it depends on, do you want somebody to build your data set? Do you want somebody to be your line drawer? How much help do you really need? It depends on how big your state is. It depends on how many hearings you're going to hold. And I have seen it go from relatively inexpensive to very, very expensive. And then, of course, if you do it right, it's usually a little bit more expensive on the front end, but then you're going to save money on the back end because you're not going to end up in court forever and ever and pay all that money that you saved on the front end to your lawyers. So that would be my...
That was what I was going to say, too, that it all depends on whether your maps stand up in court. Ben, anything on the price side from you?
On the what side, I'm sorry?
On the price, the cost of doing this?
We staff our office continually. We don't close down the redistricting office between redistricting activities. And I think that we being a smaller office, our costs are minimal. Now, we do include budget increases as we're leading up, as Karen mentioned, the more you're able to put on the front end, the better your product will be. So we do begin ramping up budget requests around this time, the 18 or the 8, 9 of the cycle, to make sure that we've got coverage. What you really have to think about when you do your budget is the legal defense part of it, because that is where really a majority of your budget money can be spent very quickly. So I wouldn't know if there was an average cost. Maybe that's something that the NCSL might want to do, is collect some budget information and come up with an average cost. But I know that in general, our office does not generate much of a budgetary footprint at all. So.
A great point, Ben. We are going to be collecting RFPs and RFIs in the near future, and I guess we could get the prices that are developed out of that. That'll be a thing for us to go in the future. One more really substantive question, then a couple of wrap-ups. Are there states that allow other political data sets to be included when analyzing maps? And I know, Karen, you said it depends on what state you're in and whether that's permitted to use political data. And then the follow-up, is it possible to keep those data sets separate from the defined data set? And I think you answered that too, but could you reinforce that?
Yeah, so this is interesting. This question says other political data sets, so I'm not sure what other, do you mean in addition to statement of vote and statement of registration? I'm not sure. I would say that usually, unless you have an explicit notation that says you can't use it, then you can probably use it. So you're going to need some political data for your Section 2 analysis if you, if you have a state, and I think it's probably pretty much everybody now who has to really pay attention to the Federal Voting Rights Act. But how much political data and what additional political data you're talking about, I'm not clear on. Is it possible to keep them separate? I would say you could keep them separate. Generally speaking, in particular if you're using these data for just to do analysis for the Voting Rights Act and also for line drawing. I mean, we do, in California, we kind of keep them separate to some extent, just because our commission does not use political data. They only are permitted to use political data for voting rights analyses. But they could, in theory, just download it. But then again, they also don't have software to do it. So anyway, I guess it really depends on your state. In theory, I would say you could probably keep it separate.
I'm going to say that we are 1 minute from the end of our webinar today. I do hope you'll all stay on because you will get a survey to help us with future topics that might be good. In the meantime, I want to say that who knew that Mississippi and California could work so well together? Two states, one small, one large, one with a commission, one with a legislature in charge, politically one in the control of Democrats, the other in control of Republicans. And look at what we did today, an excellent bipartisan presentation, and I'm so thankful for it. And with that, I think we will sign off. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.